get rolling with this week's episode, a couple quick announcements to make. First of all, I am going to be at some point doing an email newsletter. And if that's something you are interested in signing up for, if you go to my website, benhorn.com, at the bottom of that, you'll see a sign up for the newsletter. I'm not quite sure exactly what it'll be, but it's just a kind of a project I've been wanting to work on for quite some time. Another thing too, my 2017 portfolio box set is really getting close to being sold out. So I really haven't promoted it too much on here, but it is a box that contains 11 of my portfolio prints from 2017. It's an edition of 125. There's only 9 left, and you can also find that on my website. But this week's video is all about some of the realizations I had with regard to kind of being in the moment on my spring trip. I hope you guys enjoy. What is going on, everyone? So I am back from my spring trip, and I'm already kind of working on the video journals and stuff kind of in the background. And it was a pretty good trip. And the last video I put out was sort of my expectations for the spring trip. And one of the things I had mentioned in that video is that I wanted to try to feel sort of more in the moment on this particular trip, especially some of the areas I was going to, some of these really cool canyons that I backpacked into and stayed several nights in. And I think in the end, I did pretty well in that regard. And it was actually a little bit of a surprise as to how I was able to do that, because it wasn't really what I was expecting. I was thinking that one of the reasons why I'm sometimes not really in the moment on these shooting trips is because I have the earbuds in, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm listening to music, I'm listening to things other than, the birds chirping and the sound of the flowing water and the wind rustling through the cottonwood leaves. And I figured that sort of depriving me of some of, my senses and the sounds and all that sort of stuff was one of the reasons why I didn't really feel in the moment. And as a result, I decided not to bring along the iPod on the backpacking trip, just to kind of leave it behind, because I have this little tiny iPod Nano that they don't really make anymore, a little square one, and I can just load that thing up with podcasts, and if I have to sit there for about 5 hours and wait for the light to move around to be ideal for something, I can just throw in the earbuds, kind of sit back, and just kind of pass some time that way. So instead of doing that, I just kind of stared at trees and stuff like that for quite a while. And I don't think that made me feel any more in the moment. And there's something that, I don't know if any of you else kind of experience this, but if I listen to a podcast and I'm driving home from work, and then a few days later I listen to that same podcast, it could even be like months later, or maybe even a year later, I will remember exactly where I was when the people were saying a particular thing. So I'll remember, hey, I was at this intersection, I waited at that light, and then when they were saying something else a few minutes later, I'll know exactly which intersection I was. So there's something about hearing things and then committing everything around me to memory that kind of sticks with me for whatever reason. And so as a result, I think that in some ways, listening to the podcast kind of makes me feel a little more in the moment, because it allows me to sort of process everything around me. Because I didn't have it with me, and there are times when I'm just kind of staring at things. And, I think I did pretty decent at staying in the moment, but I think that actually would have helped out a little bit, especially the times when you kind of realize, hey, I'm off in the middle of nowhere, I'm off by myself, and that loneliness, that kind of solitude starts creeping in there, and you can throw in the earbuds and then kind of get a little bit more of that connection to realize that, you're in the middle of nowhere. But basically, there was another thing that kind of surprised me a little bit, which was there was another thing that happened that really did make me feel very much in the moment, and it was, basically, when I hiked into the canyon that I was staying at for a few days, there are several river crossings that you have to do. And in years past, I would bring, some neoprene socks or water shoes or something like that, where I get to the river, take off my boots, take off my socks, put on whatever else, cross the river, then put my other stuff back on. But ultimately, that it just ends up being added weight, And honestly, there's no real problem just going through the water. It's not like it's, you know, freezing areas or anything along those lines. It's really nice out. So I just kind of trudged right through the river. And then at some point on the first day, I was kind of waiting for the light to change in this particular narrow little side canyon with these really cool trees in it. There's some pools of water there. And I decided to just kind of take off my boots, take off my socks, kind of put them on a rock so that they could dry out there. And so for, I don't know, a couple hours or so, I was just kind of walking around barefoot and then, you know, feeling the cold, wet mud with my feet, feeling the wind across my feet. And I was getting that literal connection to nature by not having my shoes on. And that was one of the moments where I really felt kind of in the moment, because I was able to kind of utilize all my senses, and that was actually pretty nice. It also kind of forced me to kind of stay in a relatively small area at that point in time rather than wander around a lot, because outside that short little area where I was, there was some pretty sharp rocks, so I couldn't go too far. And then there was another moment too where I was kind of, it was really warm during the days, and then there were some times, you know, in the evening it starts to get a little cooler and stuff, and I already had dinner, it's kind of getting dark, and I was just laying there in my sleeping bag just kind of staring up at this cottonwood tree, and the moon was rising behind it, and there's bats flying around, and you hear the sound of the cottonwood leaves. So I was just trying to really take that all in and kind of remember the sights and the sounds, and I think that also helped out. But on future trips, I'm gonna bring the iPod again. I think it'll help out in those moments where you start, you know, getting that sort of tinge of loneliness kind of setting in. But also I think in some ways it might also help to kind of reinforce the sights and everything else, the smells, all the other senses as well. But I'm busy working on those video journals. Actually, I already finished up the day one video, but I want to get like the first, maybe like 5 or so of them done before I start posting any of them. But they'll be in a few weeks or so. But I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you around next week.